Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm showing you one of my favorite things to eat in a French bakery. It is Parisian Flan. It is truly one of the most delicious pastries you'll ever have, also known as a custard tart. There's a buttery pastry base, a creamy vanilla-y filling. Ooh, right? This is a dish that I plan on making during the holidays. The whole thing is like super buttery and delicious. I'm gonna show you how to make it. When I lived in France, when I moved there, I noticed that this was a thing people ate all the time. It's like a common snack for school children. Every patisserie in Paris has a version of this tart, which again, sometimes is referred to as Flan Parisian, sometimes it's called Flan Pâtissier. In English, it's often just referred to as like a custard tart. And there's a lot of different versions of this, like there's sort of an English version, an American version, but basically it is a buttery crust. Sometimes it's pâte brisée, sometimes it's like puff pastry. I'm gonna do just a basic pie dough, kind of a little bit Americanized. And then the filling is basically pudding, like a pastry cream, which is a kind of like milk thickened with eggs and a little starch and sugar. And it's cooked out, poured into this buttery crust, and then baked. You get like a beautiful clean slice, this set sort of vanilla filling all the way through, and then this kind of burnished dark top. It's just so good. I think one of the reasons why it's such a popular snack is because it's like super portable. You can like carry a slice and like eat it like a piece of pizza. So I have in front of me the ingredients for my crust and for the filling. For the crust, I'm gonna make a basic kind of flaky pie dough. So I have all-purpose flour, some ice water, butter, of course, I'm using Kerrygold, kosher salt and sugar. For the filling, which is a kind of very straightforward vanilla pastry cream, I have milk, eggs, yolks plus whole, more sugar, cornstarch, vanilla paste, and butter goes into the filling as well. In terms of special equipment, the main thing that you will need is a springform pan. This one actually is not quite springform because it doesn't, like, the ring doesn't pop off, it just has a removable bottom. So that is something you'll need. And then nothing else is really special. I have a medium saucepan for cooking the filling. That's really it, a rolling pin. That's it. So before I show you the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Kerrygold is the maker of superior quality butter. All of their butter is made from milk from small family-run farms in Ireland. I love Kerrygold for the incredibly creamy texture and the concentration of flavor. This is my butter of choice in all of my baking projects. I have done a lot of recipe testing, and I have tested recipes with all of the nationally available butter brands, and Kerrygold is the top winner. I love it for its creaminess, superior taste, has such a high fat content, so it just makes like the flakiest, butteriest crusts. I love that they make a salted and unsalted. I use it for baking, but I also just use it for like spreading on toast and eating because it just has such a great pure butter flavor. If you've seen a lot of Dessert Person episodes, you probably noticed it in my fridge. I use it all the time, and I'm just so excited to be partnering with such a wonderful brand. It's just the best butter out there. So thank you so much to Kerrygold, and now I'm gonna show you the recipe. So I have a cup and a half of flour. I'm gonna add to this a little bit of sugar. The sugar, I always say how like the sugar doesn't make it sweet, it just helps it take on a little color, encourages browning. A teaspoon of salt, but for some reason I only have a quarter teaspoon measure in my salt. Okay, you can kind of mix all this up together. I have some ice water here, that's important. And then I'm using Kerrygold butter. I love using Kerrygold butter in all of my pastry. When you use Kerrygold, what is so great is even when the pastry is cold, when you roll it out, that butter flattens out in sheets rather than like breaking apart. And that's when you get something so flaky. So Kerrygold is ideal for pastry. It works particularly well in croissants. I have a croissant recipe where I'm just use Kerrygold. It works so much better. So I'm gonna use 10 tablespoons of butter. This is a 8-ounce block. So I'm using 5 ounces, so I'm just gonna eyeball it. Okay, then I'm gonna cut this into pieces. Make sure the butter's cold. So 1/2-inch cubes are gonna go in. The name of the game when it comes to pastry is just keeping everything as cold as possible. Some people, if you live in a warm climate, I recommend freezing the flour, getting that cold. That can really help to increase the workability, the work time that you have on it. Now, what I want to do inside my bowl initially is just kind of get all those pieces coated in flour. So break them all up. And now working quickly, because your hands are warm and the butter's cold, so the more you work it, the more you will heat it up. I'm just going to smash the pieces with my thumbs into my fingers to flatten them a little bit. The idea is that you want to create little sheets. And now I'm actually done working in the bowl. What I didn't like about a lot of pie dough technique was like you're working in this bowl and like this bowl is kind of on the smaller side. Like you don't have a lot of room. You're trying to get to the bottom. I think it's more effective if you spread everything out. So this is going to get dumped onto my bench. And now I can kind of spread it out. I have an idea of what's happening. I can see what's going on. So now I'm going to add my water. So you can create like a little well in the center. So I have about a cup of ice water here. I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup, but no ice, just the water. But the point is that the water is ice cold. You know, I say to start with about 1/3 of a cup, but everyone's flour is a little bit different. I have made pie crust with my usual flour brand, but the flour was just really old and so it had dried out and it took twice the amount of water. So the point is that the amount of water is kind of fluid and you might need to add more. So just start with 1/3 of a cup. And now I want to basically just get everything mixed together. If you have some water run, just kind of bring it back together. So the main tool that you'll need for this technique is a bench scraper or a bowl scraper. A bench scraper is like a rigid piece of metal, so it doesn't bend, and a bowl scraper is usually plastic and it's flexible. Either one works here. So you're going to use the scraper actually instead of your fingertips. And what's good about that is that your hands don't get wet and then the flour doesn't stick to it, so it keeps your hands clean. But it also is not warm like your fingertips. So the idea here is that I have incorporated the water and I'm using the flat end, the blunt end of the scraper to kind of lift the mixture, move it into the center to form a pile, and then I'm chopping it up. And so there's so many things happening here. One is that I'm not warming it up with my fingers, which is a benefit. Two, I am distributing that water and evening out the hydration, which I think is a hard thing to do inside of a bowl where you can't really effectively like get to the bottom and bring it to the top. And this method of distributing that hydration is super gentle, so I'm not overworking the dough at all. The dough, I'm not developing a lot of gluten. It's not gonna make like a tough pie crust that's gonna shrink back on you. It makes such a tender dough. And the third thing that's happening is I am breaking up the pieces of butter into smaller pieces. Some of the pieces are getting really small, some of them are staying a little bit bigger, which is what you want. For a flaky and tender pie crust, you want butter that's all different sizes. So the really small pieces are going to encourage tenderness, and the bigger pieces, especially because the butter that I'm using is Kerrygold, as I roll it out, those bigger pieces of butter are gonna flatten and like spread out and become sheets, and that's gonna give me flakiness. So you can see that just from chopping, the dough has almost completely come together. I have no like super dry floury bits left, which is great, so I don't have to add any more water. But if you did, here's what you do. You squeeze together the pieces that have formed a dough, move them out of the way, and with all that little floury bits left on the bench, gather those into a pile and just like sprinkle on a little water. Bring that together. Because I want something flaky, I'm going to do a quick sort of additional step. Like basically what you have here is pie dough. You could just wrap it up, squeeze it into a circle, and that's your dough. But I like to do kind of extra step, which is a version of lamination. So lamination is that technique that you do to make croissants or Danish, where you're getting like super defined layers. And this is just a quick version of that. So I'm going to give the surface a little bit of flour to prevent sticking, and I'm going to pat it out. So actually, sometimes I just find it easier to use a rolling pin because I have better leverage. So I'm going to get this out into kind of rough square, maybe a 1/2 inch thick. And I like to use that scraper to kind of square off the sides as I'm working. Square or rectangle, it doesn't matter as long as you have right angles and straight sides. Okay, so now also still using the scraper, using that flat side, I'm going to cut the dough into 4 quadrants. Then, scraper again, I'm going to lift up the pieces one by one and stack them. So what's happening here is, if I had just made the dough as is and put it into plastic, into a disc, It would be great and flaky, but now I'm taking the number of layers and I'm quadrupling them. So you can see now I've doubled them in this stack. With a third, I've tripled them, and now I've quadrupled them. So this whole stack now I can flatten. So I have a little flour under it. I can put a little on top, and I'm just gonna pat it down. And for this recipe, I'm gonna roll it out into a circle. So what you can do is you pat it out, and you can roll it too, is you wanna kind of form it back into a circle. If you have any sticking, your scraper is the perfect tool to kind of unstick it. And I'm just kind of rounding those corners and patting it out into a circle. Okay, so there is my pie dough. So you can use the rolling pin to help you to get it into more of a circular shape. Now I want to wrap it in plastic because this has to chill. So generally speaking, anytime you're making pastry, there's some exceptions, but you want to let the dough chill before you bake it. We worked this a good amount with all that stacking and rolling. So not only do I want the gluten to kind of relax, like you always have to develop some gluten in pastry, even though you want it tender. If there was no gluten development, the whole thing would just fall apart. It would have no structure. So the gluten that we did develop has to relax so we can roll it out, and also that will prevent shrinking when you go to bake it. And we want that butter to get cold again. So I like to wrap the dough pretty tightly. Then those folds go down. And then I like to actually roll over it one more time with the rolling pin. And this just forces the dough into any voids in the plastic and tends to further prevent cracking. Although with this style of dough, because the hydration is so dialed in, generally it doesn't crack. Okay, so that's my dough. This is gonna go into the fridge. And I have one that I made last night. That's already chilled. So you wanna let this chill for at least 2 hours, but you could let it go up to 48 hours, up to 2 days. After that, there tends to be some oxidation with the flour. So if you need to do it further in advance, you're better off freezing it and then letting it thaw for overnight in the fridge before using. So I have a dough that I already prepared last night that I'm gonna bring out. I'm gonna show you how to roll it and put it in your pan. So while the dough is chilling, part of it is that the gluten is relaxing, the butter is getting cold, but another thing that's happening is the flour is really hydrating. So you have a dough when it's cold that's like, it's really firm, but it also has flexibility. And that's really the sign that you have just the right amount of hydration in the dough. You want just enough water so that you can roll the dough out and it doesn't crack, but not so much that it's wet, because then you're gonna get something a little tougher. The less water, the less gluten development. I think that, like, there's a lot of baking tools that I think for people feel like, why would I get that? It's expensive, and how many times am I going to use it? This is one of those tools that is super inexpensive. It might cost you like $2, and you will use it so much. So I cannot recommend enough that you get a bowl scraper. Okay, so I'm going to unwrap this. Often with pie dough, if you were to roll it out cold, it would kind of shatter or splinter, break apart in places. But there's two reasons why this pie dough doesn't do that. One is because the hydration is so kind of dialed in that you shouldn't really have too difficult a time rolling it out cold. So the second reason is because I use Kerrygold, and when it's cold, it's still malleable. So it's gonna roll out and not gonna splinter. But what you do wanna do to help encourage everything to kind of like glide along your surface is beat it with your rolling pin a little. You can see as I beat it though, it's not breaking apart. And I'm not like full force bearing down on it. I am just letting it almost like bounce off of the dough and not like force, like smashing it into the surface. So there's like a little bit of pulling up on it as I'm thwacking at it. If you're having some breaking apart, it might be underhydrated. One thing that helps though is that stacking further helps to even out the hydration. So if you stacked and it still happens, it might just be super, super dry. What I would do in that case is spritz it, like get a spray bottle, spritz it with some water, or like sprinkle it from very high, maybe like fold it in half so that hydration is like in the middle, and then put it back in the fridge for a few hours and then try again. If you have smaller cracks, I can show you how to patch those though. If your dough is totally breaking apart, it's underhydrated at this point. So you can see that as I'm beating it, I'm rotating it because I don't want to start creating like a direction to the dough. I want it to stay in around, which means Lots of rotating. Whatever the shape of your dough is when it's cold is the shape it wants to be when you roll it out. That means if you need to roll it into a rectangle, you should chill it in a rectangle. So once you have this out to about a 1/2 inch thickness, that's when you can start rolling. So make sure you're using enough flour, just enough flour to prevent sticking, but not so much that you're like gonna dry out the dough. And I like to also not only rotate it, but flip it. Like see what's happening on the other side. Sometimes one side is drier than the other. So it's just a good idea to know what's kind of happening all over. So I'm gonna roll this out until it's about 13 inches in diameter or 1/8 of an inch thick. I don't really want pie dough to be thicker than that. And this style of tart, actually you pour the filling into the unbaked crust. So we're not par baking this. So that's another reason why you don't want it to be too thick, because you want that crust to fully bake beneath all that filling. And if it's too thick, you'll get like a layer of kind of unbaked pastry, which you don't want. So give it a flip. It's looking good. You want to try to work somewhat quickly because you don't want that butter to get too warm. I actually kind of feel like it's hot in my kitchen today. If you are encountering lots of sticking or that butter's getting really soft, put it in the fridge. 10 minutes, that's really all it needs. Here's what you do if you have a crack. Let's say I have a crack here, right? It's breaking apart. Here's what you do. Use your scraper, cut off a piece of dough, just sort of a slightly wider than the crack. Place that over the crack, kind of press it in. You can put a little flour on top, and then you keep going. That's how you fix a crack. Because often with the crack, if it starts out small and you keep going, it'll just get bigger. So better to patch it, I think. So once you have your dough rolled out to the proper thickness, which this is about there. My dough, because it is so hot in here, it's getting a little warm, but I have it already rolled out. I might as well put it in my pan. There's a couple ways to do it. I'll actually show you a really convenient way if you have a springform pan with like a bottom. So I'm gonna basically put this round underneath the dough. So you can kind of lift it up with your scraper, your rolling pin. You can sort of just like fold the dough in half. Then this is gonna slide under. So now I have that base of the tart underneath, and then fold in all the sides of the pastry. Whoa. Like so. This goes down into your tart, and now it's centered, and all I have to do is fold out those edges of pastry. And what's great about this is if you were to try to line this by just like putting the whole round in, is you sometimes end up stretching the dough into that space where the bottom meets the side, like here. And then it like puts stress on the dough, and then it creates shrinking when it bakes, so you don't want that. So now I'm just gonna get it fitted into the pan, like press all those sides up against the pan. If you have any areas of overlap, that's fine, just press them together. You're always gonna have a little overlap. So if you need to use floured hands to prevent sticking, I'm gonna press everything in really, really firmly. You can press it down into the bottom as well. So that's what it looks like. So now I wanna trim the edge of the crust, but it's a little soft at this point, so I'm gonna put it in the freezer and I'll trim it once that dough has a chance to like really harden and set, so I get a nice clean line. So this is gonna go into the freezer and just hang out. Like that rolling action also kind of works the dough and, you know, gets the gluten going, so it's gonna wanna contract, so we just want everything to rest and chill out, literally. So while this is in the freezer, I'm gonna make the filling. So pastry cream is kind of like a style of pudding. It's basically a mixture of dairy that is sweetened and then thickened with eggs and a starch, usually cornstarch. So I'm gonna start by, it's kind of a two-step process where I warm up the dairy, I mix the eggs and sugar and starch separately. So I'm gonna start by warming up the milk. This is 3.5 cups of milk. You definitely wanna use whole milk, and you wanna use the best quality milk you can find. Maybe something local, that's ideal. And the primary flavor of the tart, besides butter, is vanilla. So this is a vanilla pastry cream. You see variations that are flavored. Sometimes you see like a chocolate version. I'm gonna use vanilla paste, and I'm gonna use a full tablespoon. It's like really important that you see those little flecks of vanilla bean. If you don't wanna use vanilla paste or a bean, you could just use extract. I would do a tablespoon of extract. If you're using extract, you might wanna add like a tablespoon of rum or something like that, just a little extra flavor. So this is gonna go in. To this, I'm gonna add a half teaspoon of salt. And then I'm gonna get this warming up. I want it to come up to like a very low simmer, basically. So then over here I have a mixing bowl. This has my sugar in it. It's a cup of granulated sugar. And then I'm gonna add my cornstarch. This is 6 tablespoons of cornstarch. So I'm gonna whisk all of that together. I have 8 tablespoons of butter cut into pieces. It's right here. This is gonna get whisked in after everything's cooked. So make sure you have that, because once you start cooking everything, you add the eggs, you're like on the clock. So once you add eggs to a hot mixer and you're cooking it, like you can't really walk away and go cut a stick of butter, because everything could overcook really easily. You don't want to scramble the eggs. So just have everything ready to go. And on that note, I also have a separate bowl with a sieve set over it, because I'm gonna strain the pastry cream. Now, while the milk is warming up, I'm gonna add my eggs. I have 4 yolks and 2 whole eggs. Adding a little bit of whole egg to the pastry cream lightens it a little bit. So I like that mix of yolks and whole eggs. This is gonna go into my bowl with the sugar and the starch. You don't wanna do this in advance, because that contact between the eggs, particularly the yolks and the sugar, can, people say it kind of cooks the yolk, but basically you get little sort of hardened bits of yolk if it sits for a long time, and you don't want that. So just do this only when you already have your milk mixture warming up, and I can see that it's getting a little, there's some movement under the surface there, so that it's coming up to a simmer. So I'm just gonna whisk this really thoroughly. Even with just like 20 to 30 seconds of whisking, it's lightened in color. It's become a little bit paler. And often what you see with recipes that tell you to blanch the eggs is like, it'll say like ribbony. We don't really have to go until it's ribbony. That means like it's super thick and light. You can see that it's nice and pale and kind of thick and a little bit light. So my milk mixture is just under a simmer. There's some steam rising from the surface. So now I'm gonna go on to the step called tempering. Tempering is where you take your hot liquid and you pour it into the egg slowly while whisking. This is gonna raise the temperature of your eggs so that you can cook everything together and not scramble them. Get a little towel under my bowl so it's nonstick. I'm sorry, I wanna get a towel under my bowl so it doesn't slide around. Now I'm gonna take my hot milk mixture and whisking with one hand and pouring with the other. I'm gonna slowly stream in about 2/3 of it. Try not to spill all of it. Okay. Then leaving a little bit in the saucepan, I'm gonna now whisk everything back into the saucepan, and it's off the heat at the moment. Keep that in mind. Scrape everything in. Everything now is in my saucepan. It's warmish to hot. And now I'm gonna put it back over the heat. I'm gonna go with medium. You don't wanna really blast it with heat, because you don't want it to cook unevenly, and you don't want like the eggy part at the bottom to cook before the top. So you wanna whisk constantly. And you can see that I have all this foam on the top from like really beating everything together well. And what happens as this mixture warms up, basically like the eggs kind of come up to temperature, they start to cook, the whole mixture starts to thicken. One of the signs that you're getting really close to that stage of like doneness is that that foam will subside. Pastry cream is like a lot of stuff in baking where it's like nothing happens until it happens. So you're gonna be here stirring while the whole thing is coming up to temp. An important note is that when you have cornstarch as your thickener, you need everything to come to a boil to fully activate that cornstarch. And of course it's gonna bake again in the oven, but anytime you're baking pastry cream, especially if it's not getting cooked again, you want the mixture to come to a boil. That's how you know that you've activated all of the cornstarch. And that only happens after that thickening takes place. So I'll sort of show you how to make sure that it's cooked but not overcooked. Because if you overcook pastry cream, it just gets like hard and like lumpy, and you don't want that either. It's also really important that you're working in like a pretty heavy pot, you know, not something like flimsy with thin walls or sides, because it's just really easy to scorch pastry cream as it thickens. So I have my butter here off to the side because As soon as it's done, I'm gonna take it off the heat and then whisk in the butter one piece at a time. So make sure you have everything ready to go. It's starting to hold the marks of the whisk and definitely thickening. That was probably 4 minutes. See how different it looks? You wanna keep whisking until it looks like pudding. And then here's what you wanna do. You're gonna stop whisking for a few seconds. And I'm looking for like big, slow, do you hear that? Okay, ready? See that?
Sorry, I need one more.
Ah!
One more?
No, Cal, I can't. It'll be overcooked. Sorry. So you see that like big, slow bubble rising from the bottom? That means we're at a boil. So once you hit that point, whisk on the heat for like another 5 to 10 seconds and then remove it. So here I have my pastry cream. And now it's off the heat. I'm gonna whisk in the butter one piece at a time. The butter is cold, and when you whisk it in, the butter is gonna melt, so it's actually going to look like the pastry cream is thinning out, which it kind of is. But when everything is chilled, that butter is gonna like solidify again and be solid. So it's actually going to increase the kind of set of your pastry cream, just not while it's hot. So of course the heat from everything is melting. So all of that butter is in. Make sure everything is totally melted. So this is all smooth. Now I'm gonna strain it. You wanna do this while it's hot because when it's hot, it's more fluid, so it's gonna pass through the strainer more easily. I'm done with the whisk at the moment. Now I'm just switching to a flexible spatula. I'm gonna scrape in my pastry cream. See how it's pourable at this stage. You might find some slightly overcooked areas at the bottom of the saucepan. That's normal. It depends on the size of your saucepan, your heat, the quality of the cookware you're using. But this is also partly why we're straining it. If you have any really overcooked areas, this will remove the lumps. It's really easy to just get all this through. The spatula presses it through so quickly. Always remember to scrape the bottom of the sieve, but leave a little bit because you can taste that. And what you want to do is chill this, but first, it's an important step. You want to put a piece of plastic directly over the surface to prevent that skin from forming. So what I like to do is press it into the center first, and be careful because it's hot. And then I like to work it around the edges. And the idea is not to trap any air. You want to press out the air and get it in full contact with the pudding everywhere, just like that.
So now it's just pudding.
So this is just pudding, vanilla pudding, pastry cream, whatever you want to call it, a lot of it. And there are recipes and preparations where you might take a hot pastry cream or like a hot mixture like that and pour it into your pan and bake it right away. But I think it's best to actually make this ahead of time and chill it. So I have a batch that I made last night that's cold. I have my crust that's in the freezer. I don't want to pour like hot pastry cream onto an unbaked crust because it's just gonna like kind of melt everything and get it soft. So I'm gonna put the cold, set, chilled pastry cream in my crust, trim that edge, fill it, and get it in the oven. Okay, this is my cold pastry cream from yesterday. I made this last night. I already took the plastic off. You can see that it's like super set. Then I'm gonna whisk it. You'll see what happens to the texture. But first I'm gonna grab my crust that's just been in the freezer. I have a rimmed baking sheet here because with a springform pan and like a buttery crust, often it's best practice to like put it on a sheet tray to catch any butter drips because that can hit the floor of your oven and get everything super smoky. The crust is like really firm. It's hardened really nicely. I want to trim that raw edge. You could leave the raw edge. I think it looks kind of cool, but sometimes like little edges that are sticking up will catch, meaning like they'll get a little dark, they'll kind of cook faster. So I'm gonna just trim everything to get a nice clean finish. I have on my bowl scraper a rounded edge here that's gonna kind of fit into the side of the pan. So I'm gonna try to use this and just basically hold it horizontal and level and work it all the way around to get a clean edge. Could also use like a little offset spatula for this part too.
You're doing it, Peter.
What's that from?
Hook.
Oh, the food scene is the best scene. Obviously, I think the food scene is the best scene.
You mean when they eat the slug?
When they imagine the table of food and it's like the whole feast. Great food styling. So here's my little trim pieces. Have I done this evenly all the way around? I hope so. If you have any little bare patches, you can use the trim to patch them. So like I have a little spot where it got a little thin, so I might want to just press some crust up against it. So you can see once it's set, it's like a little bit gloppy, but once I get a whisk in it and start to work it, everything smooths out again. Okay, so now I want to scrape this into my crust. This is going to go in. Let me grab my spatula. I would say that the edges, like the walls of my crust, are at least 1.5 inches tall. So now everything is in, and I'm just going to use my little offset spatula to smooth the surface. I want it really level. On my baking sheet, this is going to go into my oven. It's been preheating at 350. So depending on the thickness and the oven temperature, you get like a fully burnished surface, which I love. Sometimes it just kind of like, you know, it's kind of like leoparded, it's spotted. One trick for achieving that really burnished texture on the surface is brushing a little bit of beaten egg yolk across it, but I'm not gonna bother. I think it's good as is. So I'm just gonna get it in the oven. And it's gonna cook for like 40 to 50 minutes. That color is normal. So the tart baked for like an hour and wasn't really getting a lot of color on it. And then I noticed toward the end that it was getting some color, and then all of a sudden the whole thing like got really dark. But I like that level of doneness. I promise that's what I want it to have. I'm gonna just let it cool over on the stovetop. Ooh, it looks really good. I'm happy with that. I promise. That's what you want it to look like.
You sure about that?
Yep, positive.
It's like chocolate.
How long is the ideal wait time?
Okay, so here's the thing about this tart. You want it to be cold. And to serve it, you can take the chill off, so like let it come to room temp a little bit. But the whole thing needs to kind of chill before you can cut it, which means refrigerating it. So I'm gonna let it cool completely and then chill it in the fridge. I've let the tart cool for, I think it's been an hour and a half. And now it's a little bit warm still, so I wanna just show you what the sides look like. One thing I really love is how the filling settled, and it's like created these like cool wrinkles in the surface, and it has revealed that cut edge of pastry where you can see the layers. So it just like looks super appealing because you know it's gonna be like really flaky. I wanna be very careful to pop it out. And if you have a springform pan, it's probably a good idea to cut around the sides, because sometimes like it's gonna pull out and you don't wanna like pull a piece of crust out with you. Use a mini offset or even like a really small paring knife and just go around the edge between the crust and the pan. And often I like to like leverage against the pan to make sure I'm not removing any crust. But this one just pops out, so I can kind of gently push from the bottom, make sure it's not stuck anywhere. This is a super old pan. I think this pan used to be my grandma's. Ooh, right? You can see that the pastry is the most perfect shade of golden brown. It is like super well baked. I like this thickness. I want like a good amount of the filling because I just love the flavor so much, but I still want like a decent ratio of crust at the same time. So it's like, this is my kind of Goldilocks level. I'm gonna get this on a plate because the bottom is a little bit of butter on it, and then this is gonna go into the fridge. You wanna wait until it's cold to slice it. So I would say several hours, overnight's even better. I made some room, it wasn't easy, but this is gonna go into the fridge. All right, here we go. This can go in uncovered, by the way. It's still a little warm. The tart has been chilling for a couple of hours. I think it's cold enough to slice, and I kind of can't wait any longer. So I'm gonna grab it, and then we're gonna taste. All right, it looks so good. It's definitely cold to the touch. I think a serrated knife is best just to get through that crust. Ooh, sorry. I'm gonna lift out this slice. Ooh, it looks so good. See how it has a little bit of a wiggle? Just like not too set. I love the kind of layered effect, like that super dark top, the like really creamy interior, and then that crust on the bottom. I think if I had let it chill even longer, I'd get like an even cleaner slice. But like, look at how nice that cuts. Let's see if I can pick it up like a pizza. I can. My God. It's so good. It would really be good, like a little bit of rum in it. So creamy, super buttery. It's a really good dessert. The crust, even though we didn't par bake it, is cooked all the way through. The bottom, golden brown, baked through. See that bottom? Hard for me to think of another dessert that starts off so humbly. It's just a couple ingredients like milk and butter and flour, but culminates in something that is like so impressive. And also you can make everything in stages. So easy to kind of prep ahead of time. You can let it chill overnight. It's like not that many desserts that are like a tart where it's like you want it to just kind of like sit for a long time in the fridge. You could even put the crust in the pan and just keep it in the freezer, like wrap it airtight, keep it there, fill it with the filling, pop it in the oven, kind of bake while you're prepping other stuff. And then you have this like incredible dessert that looks so cool. I really feel like, what's this dessert called again? I really feel like Parisian flan should be a thing in the US. It's such a good dessert. I really hope you give it a try. Maybe make it for friends and family during the holidays. So I want to thank Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Kerrygold makes incredible butter, salted and unsalted. It is a staple of all of my holiday baking. So check it out. For more info, go to kerrygoldusa.com. And I hope you have a very happy holidays. Don't forget to like and subscribe.